you have a little stand?
Um, came, but
That microphone.
one of the happiest things at all Ojai festivals is to make a new musical friend and a new musical hero, and it's such a pleasure to welcome to Ojai for the first time one of the really great master musicians among us, Wuman. Wuman plays this fantastic instrument called the pipa, which is of very long history and tradition, which we'll talk about. And not only has she brought the tradition of that instrument, but she has brought it to bear on a whole new literature of music written for the instrument, with her as the catalyst and the generator of a whole new vocabulary of music for pipa. So she's a very fitting presence for the Ojai Festival, and we'll have a lot of the privilege of hearing her play across the weekend, and as you can see tonight too. I have to begin by confessing something. We've known each other for, I think, about 15 years, something like that, through another magic catalyst type Yo-Yo Ma, because Wuman has been a very central member of the Silk Road Ensemble. I finally confessed after however many, 10 plus years, maybe 15, that we've known each other, that I said to Wuman, you know, I have such a complete soft spot for you in my heart as both a musician and personally, that one of Yo-Yo's colleagues, Catherine Gavers, whenever they wanted me to do something and they thought I didn't want to do it, Catherine would say, Wuman will be there. And I'd say, oh, okay, I'll do it.
That's really good to know that.
And I will now, tell Catherine I finally publicly confessed how ably manipulated I was. But so when Tom Morris and I started to have our first conversations about the talks for this year, he said, not knowing this history, which I just confessed to you, he said, and I thought, would you think about doing a talk with Wuman? And I said, oh, sure. So I'm particularly happy for us to be joined, and for Wuman for you to meet Wuman, and for Wuman to meet the wonders of Ojai. Wuman, we ended the conversation with Clara about her beginnings, and maybe it's appropriate for us to begin at the beginning with you, which is when music entered your life, where, and when the pipa entered your life, and in a way the moment you knew that this instrument was going to be the center of your work in your life.
Well, I think for most musicians, probably always the same story. Actually, pipa was very popular in China. It's one of the traditional instruments, and during 70s, 80s, quite huge in China. And again, for my experience, I said so many times, all about my parents. They really, actually, they chose for me, and they pushed me. I said, tiger parents, very much like, Chinese family. So, but when I was 9 years old, I started showing sort of the talent of music. Singing was very in tune, and I always enjoyed of that. So a friend of my father, he's an instrumentalist from local.
And where was this?
My hometown is called Hangzhou, very close to Shanghai. If you ask any Chinese people Hangzhou, they will say, wow. So most beautiful city, very much like I was mentioning, like all the bamboos and silk and lake, kind of beautiful city. So my father's friend said, well, you should let your daughter to pick up some instrument. I can teach. So that's how started, yeah.
And did you take to it immediately? Was it like a match perfect for you, or?
Well, imagine 9 years old kid and sitting there practice. That was so boring. I was, is that right? I totally. It was like really, I wasn't enjoyed at all. And but I remember every time I try to practice and just a few notes, and I just running around, and I know at the time my father gonna came back, and I sitting there and started. That was tricky. I think all the kids does that.
Yes, I was going to say you were a perfectly normal kid.
But since then, I think when I was 12 years old, 13 years old, and I got this audition and went to music school in Beijing, and since then. It's still here. I'm still holding.
So by 13, you knew that this was a path for you?
Yeah, that's very much like in China. When you're young and you pick one profession, and no matter you're a music or dancer or sports, and they put you in the sort of professional training, that's immediately that's your
path.
That's your path.
Maybe you should give us a very general introduction to the instrument and also its history. It obviously has similarities to a lute, which is Arab through Spain, European instrument. Tell us the history of
It actually related with the lute from Central Asia. Which is 2,000 years ago. And in Tang Dynasty, which is 1,500 years ago, introduced it to China, but very differently. If you see in the Metropolitan Museum, they still have the 17th century pipa.
Huh.
Yeah, much smaller, and with the 4 strings, holding very much like a lute. And so again, I always joke, I said the Chinese developed, gradually took 1,000 years. And
the instrument migrated.
Yes, and this is the way we play, and with the 5 fingers. I use 5 plastic fingernails on the fingers. So this is a very kind of modern way to play this instrument. And 4 strings, you see the 4 tuning pick, and the tuning is A, D, E, A, La, Re, Mi, La. And the difference than guitar or lute or oud or sitar, actually in some way very much like a sitar in the music intonation, the style. Because I have such high bamboo frets, so it's easy to bending the notes. So that's kind of the style.
You mentioned even before you played the pipa that you sang, and there seems to me, to my ear, is a real connection between singing and playing the pipa. Is that the way phrases are expressed and bent?
Yes, very much. There's yesterday I talked to my manager, we discussed about music. There's always a space. And that's slightly different than the Western music. In Chinese music, notes between notes, you often hear some Chinese music very slow and kind of meditative. So that's exactly. Space.
Is the repertoire for the most traditional repertoire for the instrument, is it a written out kind of, if you will, classical tradition, or is it a folk tradition orally passed down, or some combination of the two? Maybe those categories don't apply.
Yeah, in the old days, it's oral tradition. There's no music score for pipa. So first notated it down in later 19th century. So, and then we have pipa music in the very special kind of notation. And before that, it's all oral tradition. So those sort of traditional we also call classical repertoire, only probably 20, 25.
But they're relatively fixed pieces.
Fixed pieces, but also if you look at the score, it's mostly skeleton notes.
With the expectation that you decorate
That's
around
all
it.
you have to learn from master, face to face.
So that's taught master to
yes,
apprentice.
Yes, if you look at the score, there's no way you can learn. You learn just like piano or violin, just the single notes. So that's the way, very, very different. But of course, later, 20th century, we have started with composed pipa music.
And when does that begin, roughly?
Roughly early, I would say probably arrangement, maybe 1940. Very few, maybe 2 or 3 pieces. And the 60s starts arranged a lot of revolution song and the folk songs. And of course now they started composed for pipa. So.
There's, you know, when you hear a woman talk about going essentially to conservatory in Beijing, there is in the conservatories in China a wing for Western classical music where many great musicians are coming from these days. But there's also a traditional instruments conservatory, and the traditional instruments orchestras. Those are relatively a modern invention, right?
Yes.
The traditional instrument orchestras, they in a way mimic Western orchestras, but with Chinese traditional instruments.
Very, very much those kind of concept with the all Chinese traditional instrument with a big ensemble, big orchestra, very much a Soviet Union system.
Right. Yeah, sort of the socialist realism music.
Yeah.
It was influenced by Soviet teachers in
50s.
50s.
Yes.
And I have to tell this one story. In my second, but my first real extended trip to China, where we were visiting conservatories about 10 years ago in Shanghai. You know, we were happily, Juilliard students were playing the music of Elliott Carter, and that was terrific, and there was orchestral concerts. But we were invited to a concert of the Traditional Instruments Orchestra of the Shanghai Conservatory in Shanghai, in a concert I think in Pudong, if I remember right. And so I was very excited. I thought, you know, after hearing nothing but Western classical music, I was going to hear the real thing. So I went, and there was an orchestra sitting on stage. It was an oratorio about the something princess, Marco Polo's great something. Forgive my very approximate memory. Jet lag entered into it, so it had a surreal feel to it. And so I walk into this concert hall saying, finally, real Chinese music. And I look at the orchestra, and it looks suspiciously like a Western classical orchestra, except everybody's holding Chinese instruments. And the closest thing to a cello, a bowed lower string instrument, is an erhu in China. And right where the cello section would be is an erhu section. And then the reed instruments are right where the oboes and the clarinets would be. And the piece, I thought, okay, this is all right. And the piece began, and it sounded suspiciously like Mahler Second meets Puccini's Turandot, played by Chinese instruments, which is this very strange tradition in modern China of these kind of Europeanized pieces for Chinese traditional instruments.
It's still going on right now.
And
I will have to, sorry.
And fortunately, one of the many reasons I admire Woman so much is I feel like when I heard her play, especially when she plays from this sort of core repertoire, but also newer pieces, then I finally think, there's the real thing. We didn't really talk about this, and I don't want to impose, but I will. Could you give us even a sampling of a little bit of that kind of core repertoire, one of those, a part of one of those 20 to 25 pieces, just so we know what the starting point of pipa music is, and tell us a little about what you'll play.
Yeah, so pipa music have two different styles. One is we call lyrical style, which is you just heard slow, left hand, a lot of vibrato, harmonic, something like that. Always kind of describe scenery. Sometimes with the titles. Chinese music mostly will always titles in each piece.
And a lot of landscape.
Yes,
music.
a lot of basically landscape. Describe flower, during evening. There's moon over the mountain, and fisherman's song. All kind of that kind of image give you. So pipa music was typical, a part of that, and. The other style, which is we call martial style or military style, very dramatic, very percussive. Sometimes people think, wow, it sounded like rock and roll.
This is the Eric Clapton of the pipa.
Yeah, so a lot of right-handed technique, like flamenco guitar, like a.
I want to amend my remark that Jimi Hendrix of the pipa.
So in some way, very modern in sound. So those two sort of a classical style, and we all have to learn. So, and then now the contemporary piece, modern pieces, composer started to study this instrument. So, kind of bring both style in one piece, and so make so different color of them.
So in this kind of core repertoire, it's one or the other.
Yes, but we require all the player has to learn both.
Both.
Yes.
So it's like a duality that you have to master. Would you do something from one of these? I don't know how excerptable it is, and I don't want to completely put you on the spot.
Which style you wanted to hear?
We have lyrical and rock and roll. There's the dichotomy right there. You choose.
In this afternoon setting, after lunch, and have a cup of coffee, that moment I think I should go to lyrical style. And just enjoy, sit back, imagine you're somewhere in China, and this landscaping. The piece is called Flute and Drum Music at Sunset.
So your career begins, develops, evolves in China. When and how and why did you come to the U.S.?
It was very kind of shocking moment culturally, and also as a young musician, a student still was in China in the conservatory. I still remember that moment when Isaac Stern came to our school. He gave a master class, and he talks about why you want to be a musician. I was sitting in the audience, thousands of kids and all the faculties from all over China in my conservatory in the small auditorium. And I was...
Sorry, let me just interrupt just to make sure you understand the reference point for you for those of you who saw the film called From Mao to Mozart, which documented Isaac Stern's trip to China. Which was his first time. And I didn't know this. Woman is talking about that trip, which is documented in that film. And she's a young student sitting among thousands listening.
So that brought me the why and the why, how, that kind of a question. So 1990, I moved here. And it was just curiosity, same as all the musicians, artists wanted to know. To me, I wanted to know, like, what's going on outside of China? What the musicians doing there? How their life? And for us, for my life in China, from conservatory, got a degree, and gonna be a young faculty, and I already clear saw my future, and I earned money more than my dad. And so kind of,
So you were settled already?
Yeah, very much, and but boring.
Settled is often boring.
It's only early 20s, so what am I gonna do? Those 25 pieces I've been played when I was 9 years old, and so what am I gonna do next? And so something come up, and of course, 80s Chinese government opened the door, and we have a lot of information from outside of China, and so for us, younger generation,
And where did you come first?
Connecticut.
And what drew you there?
My husband.
That's an excellent reason. But then, what was your musical landing in the U.S.?
Oh my God, it was, I was there, and I got the first in national competition, and young generation of like a young star in China, and I came here in 1990. I was yeah, starts zero.
And I'm sure more than one person said, "What do you do?"
Exactly.
And what is that? So and how did the road begin?
Well, I joined. Luckily, we have New York City, which is amazing city, and I joined a group in Chinatown called Music from China, and all gathering musicians from China and some friends. It was in Chinatown. I remember Elizabeth Street is dry cleaning a basement. Every weekend, I took a train from Connecticut to New York, and coming down the basement and kind of to practice. We're getting together, play music we like, and occasionally we play, high school, community, and so that's how I started my.
And you were playing both this core historic repertoire as well as newer pieces.
Some newer pieces.
Chinese pieces written.
Chinese pieces, and Chinese composers started writing.
And when did the encounters with contemporary music and non-Chinese composers beginning to be interested in pipa? When did that cross-fertilization first begin?
I think a few years later, when Kronos Quartet I think David Harrington of Kronos Quartet, he was looking for, Kronos always looking for something challenge. And they're looking for Chinese composer to write a piece for them. And somehow he landed in Zhou Long and Chen Yi, both Chinese composer. That time they were studying at the Columbia University and their house, and then they showing some tapes and video for him, and there's my solo there. And immediately grabbed that. What's that weird instrument? Sounded like Jimi Hendrix. And so they commissioned the Zhou Long to write a piece for string quartet and the pipa.
And just to tie things around in the complex webs that life weaves, you remember yesterday Steve Schick talked about this very influential person in his life named Zhou Wenzheng, who was Varèse's great disciple and the keeper of the Varèse flame, who was Steve Schick's connection to Edgar Varèse. Well, here's a whole other dimension of Zhou Wenzheng, which is he came to the US many years ago and he became a magnet for a generation of Chinese composers to come, a younger generation of Chinese composers, to come to the US and largely study at Columbia University. And in one way or another, he had ties to Bright Sheng and Tan Dun and Zhou Long and Chen Yi, all of these composers who are now, in the true sense, Chinese American composers who have created a whole new vocabulary of bicultural, multicultural voices, and this very same Zhou Wenzheng, who Steve Schick talked about as a hero, as the link to Varèse, is the reason why I think Zhou Long was here, right?
Zhou Wenzheng's a student. Yes, yeah. Zhou Long was one of the, and so that's how the piece existed, and that was actually first in the history ever. Pipa combined with a string quartet.
And it's also, I must say, we should take a second for the boundless curiosity of the Kronos Quartet, and especially David Harrington, in opening doors and opening windows musically at every turn. And remarkably, they've now been at it for more than 40 years, and this huge body of music exists, including the very first piece that was written for pipa and string quartet. That led to others, memorably, right?
That was 1992, very early, yeah.
But that led to other pieces, and not just by Chinese composers.
Yeah, and then that started with the kind of, the ball started rolling.
Just because of the momentum that the Kronos Quartet created by many performances and a recording of this piece. And if I'm remembering right, isn't there a Terry Riley piece for you and Kronos as well? Maybe you can talk about that.
So actually, next week, 2026, Terry gonna be 80 years old. So we're gonna celebrate in Bay Area in San Francisco. And Terry Riley wrote a piece called, 3 years ago for Kronos and myself. It's called The Cusp of Magic. It's a 45 long piece, with the 6 different movements. And I remember Terry, first time I saw Terry, he looks like Santa Claus with a long beard. And so we talked about, he came to my concert, tried to learn the pipa, and I sent a bunch of my CDs. And so he finished the first page. He sent it to me and said, "Is that durable?" And same as Lou Harrison, same thing. And so I said, it sounded like an Indian sitar, and kind of like a jazz guitar, very rhythmic, which is not in Chinese traditional music. We don't do 16, 18, or 21 something. That like crazy for me. That was first time I worked with Terry, and the piece turned very successful, and we recorded, and then we're going to play next week.
For his,
again.
for his
Yes.
80th birthday.
Yes.
Just again to keep making these links that magically occur in Ojai, Terry's son, Gian. Riley is playing at one of the concerts this weekend, and Gian is a brilliant guitarist. So Terry comes to mastery of guitar. You mentioned, very importantly, Lou Harrison, who, before any of this was in anybody's eyes, Lou is in the 90s can conference Europe or but looking in his case towards what we and being a true Pacific Rim composer and looking towards Asia and Japan and especially China. And on this festival, you will be playing the pipa tomorrow. The pipa concerto that Lou Harrison wrote for pipa and strings.
String orchestra.
And string orchestra. Tell us a little about the history of that piece and how you came to it.
That was premiered in 1997 when Lou's 80 birthday, commissioned by Lincoln Center, and which is for Stuttgart Chamber. Mm-hmm. And Dennis Russell Davies and me. Actually, because Dennis and Lou, they're friends. So I remember when I first time worked with Dennis with the American Composers Orchestra with different pieces. And after that, Dennis said we should ask Lou to write a piece. That time I didn't know who's Lou. Forgive me, yeah, you know, so many things happen, like people telling me someone, I said, I don't know. So we called him Lou. I really, really admired and respect Lou because when he was 80 years old, he's still taking this challenge to write this unfamiliar instrument. And he said, you know, I spent time early years in Indonesia and in Taiwan. And so I'm gonna write something I wanted to write, but not like Chinese traditional classical repertoire, the style, the martial or the lyrical. And I said, Lou, that's fine. And he finished, he finished the first page and some scale. And then he faxed me. During that time, we don't have email yet, you know, no iPhone. So faxed me, and it was, that's the scale. D flat, E flat. Rest of same. And I said, Lou said, is this okay? I said, yeah, that's fine. But sounded nothing like Chinese. And there's one part. Beautiful, beautiful melody, very simple. Combine this instrument with all the strings, just a beautiful color. And I always say this is not like a European music or Chinese music. It's very much Lou Harrison. It's very much California. Yeah.
And we should say, I think I've checked where you're living these days, but you yourself are now a Californian, right? Or are you still in San Diego? Or?
I'm still in San Diego.
So, you know, we can claim a woman as a Californian.
Oh yeah, I'm totally.
That totally gave you away. It's amazing to listen. You know, you arrive here looking to get away from being settled as boring in 1990. And by 1997, you've had pieces written for you in the Kronos Quartet. You've had Lou Harrison, a senior great American pioneer, writing you a concerto. So what you sought happened.
I'm still like in my dream.
And you started this new life, and we'll extend a lot of Wuman's work in more recent years with composers and the whole body now of new music written for her in combination with not just Western instruments, but instruments of other cultures as well. I think on Sunday, you'll hear Wuman play with Sandeep Das, who's an astonishing tabla player. Talk about talking drums and drums that tell a story. And there's an intersection of very traditional Indian culture reimagined and very traditional Chinese culture reimagined, all existing in the new world, because Sandeep now lives in the United States as well. At some point, you made we're going to switch in the middle of the talk. You may have wondered why it's 90 minutes. We're going to watch a short, roughly half-hour-long film that Wuman has made, and maybe you can introduce it. At some point, you took what you'd experienced here and returned home to China, and maybe you can tell us about the film.
Yeah, again, when I left China in 1990, and all my life, I grew up in urban city, and then went to music school, which is the Juilliard in China, yeah. And but in Beijing, and very much isolated in some way. For I never really understand what is Chinese folk music. So when I moved here, many people ask me, say, what is Chinese music? Tell me. And that moment, I will always stuck for seconds, how can I answer that? What is Chinese music? There's so many. What kind?
Right.
So that's bring me back, bring me the think I have to go back to China. And I took, since 2006, I back to China every year until 2009. And so I went to countryside, a remote area, and in the northern part of China and also center part of China to looking for the Chinese music roots, the earthy kind of Chinese music.
The source.
The source. And most we know in the West, pipa, erhu, zither, dulcimer, flute, very much urban music. So what is the real in the countryside, a remote area? What do they do with the music? So that makes me thinking, and that's why I made this film.
I think it probably needs a moment of explanation. These sound like these weather alerts that are unstoppable, which does cause, it's not the sound that causes worry so much as the weather alerts. So I hope that doesn't mean worrisome weather is about to cross our paths. But in any case, flash flood warning, I think we're safe here anyway. I think the only torrent we can promise you is music right at the moment. And so this film documents your travels and exploration of music at the origin in China.
Yes, a very interesting experience, which is you will see not only what do they do with the music, but also their lifestyle. This is very, very recent, and it's showing very different kind of China. It's not Beijing, Shanghai. You see that high-rise building. It's still very poor area, and also you will hear what do they say about traditional music, and so it's combined not only music but also their life now today in China.
So we'll watch the film and come back at the end of it for a few minutes of questions.